The wind came off the mesa like a curse, dry, hard, and mean. It combed through the ghost town of Larkspur, lifting dust from the crevices of plankboard walls and whistling through broken windows like some spirit long refused its peace. Midday light fell thinly filtered through a chalk gray sky that promised snow, but only ever gave wind. He sat hunched in the back corner of the diner, if you could call it that, with its 3 tables and cold iron stove that clicked but never quite caught. His coat was patched at the elbows, his hat low, casting a shadow over a face carved more by loss than age. He nursed a coffee gone cold hours ago, black as the grief he carried but not half as strong. No one else was there. No one else ever was. Until she walked in. She came like a ghost. Thin, raw-boned, her dress soaked at the hem with melting sleet, her coat borrowed from someone with broader shoulders and worse luck. She kept one hand on the doorframe a beat too long, as though the ground might tip again. Her eyes scanned the room, not for kindness, not for company, just for space. Her 3 little ones followed like shadows, one on her hip, 2 clutching the fabric of her skirt, with fingers blue from cold. She did not look at him. She looked at the counter, the old woman behind it, and the chair closest to the stove. He watched her settle the children without a word, watched her place the smallest on her lap, unwrap a scarf from around the oldest's neck, then divide it between the 2 younger ones. She had done this before. Many times, likely. In different towns with different eyes watching. She was not new to hunger. The waitress came out from the back with a cloth over her arm and pity on her lips, but the woman shook her head before she spoke. "Just some bread," she said, "and hot water if you've got it." The waitress hesitated. "Mom, that won't." "I know what it won't," the woman said, her voice low but not sharp. "Just tired. But it's all right." The man stood up then. He did not think. He just stood. The waitress caught his eye. "Add them to my bill," he said. The woman looked up. For the first time she saw him. Her eyes didn't widen. Her mouth didn't part in thanks. She only looked at him like he'd handed her a stone she wasn't sure how to carry. "I didn't ask," she said. "I didn't say you did." Her chin lifted half an inch. "You think I'm too proud." "No," he said, quiet. "I think you're too tired to be proud." The wind pushed against the windows, rattling them in their frames. The waitress brought bowls of stew instead of bread, and the children ate without speaking. Only the middle one glanced at him, a boy with hair sticking straight up and eyes like skinned knees. Curious, half afraid. The man looked away. The woman never once smiled. He sat back down, waited until they were nearly done. Then he laid the money on the counter in coins and small bills, the kind that spoke of horse feed and low wages. He did not expect anything when he left. Just the ache in his hip where the old wound lived, and the taste of bitter coffee clinging to his mouth. But halfway down the boardwalk, the oldest child came running after him, panting through chapped lips, her boots tied with twine. "Mister," she said, holding out a folded scrap of paper. "She told me to give you this." He took it, confused, as the girl ran back inside. The note was written in a looping, deliberate hand, careful, as though each word cost something. On it, 3 lines. "You reminded me people like you still exist. I had nearly forgotten. This isn't charity. It's a seed. If you ever find the trail past Dawson Ridge, look for a sycamore bent east. We owe you more than a meal." He folded the paper once, then again, slipped it into his coat where he kept the worn photo of a boy in uniform and a letter that never got mailed. The wind bit at his face, but he kept walking toward the livery, toward something he hadn't dared carry in years. Hope, maybe. The trail past Dawson Ridge wasn't marked on any map he trusted. Most folks passed through Dawson only once, if at all, and left the ridge behind them like a bad memory. Snow gathered deep in its hollows, and the wind there didn't whistle, it howled. Still, the man rode toward it, saddle creaking beneath him, his mare's breath rising in white puffs that vanished into sky. He hadn't told anyone where he was going. No one had asked. 3 days since the girl handed him the note. 3 days since he left Larkspur, carrying only what he needed: rifle, bedroll, tobacco, and the paper folded so tight it might never open again. He thought of her, of the woman in the diner, more than he meant to. How still she'd sat. How she hadn't thanked him with words, only with that note and her silence. The snow deepened the farther he climbed. What trees remained were half dead, leaning into wind like old men too proud to lie down. He passed animal tracks, rabbit, maybe fox, and once the long drag of something too big to be hunted alone. He kept his hand near the rifle. It was dusk on the fourth day when he saw it. A sycamore alone and bent eastward as though bowed by prayer. One limb hung low, snapped but not broken, its bark silver gray against the deep blue of the cold. He reined in his mare and dismounted slow. Snow crunched underfoot. His joints ached like bad memories. Behind the tree, a trail barely wide enough for a wagon cut through the trees. It twisted downward, then disappeared into a small draw where a faint curl of smoke rose into the still air. He followed it. At the base of the slope, sheltered between stone and pine, stood a cabin. Rough-hewn one room by the look of it, but smoke poured steady from its chimney and light bled out around the seams of its window shutters. A sound half-song, half-hum drifted to him as he approached, the kind a mother makes when the world is too loud for her children. He knocked once. The door opened slowly. She stood there, coatless this time, her sleeves rolled to the elbows. Her face was flush with heat or work or both. Her eyes didn't widen. Her mouth didn't move. "I wasn't sure you'd come," she said. "Neither was I." She stepped back, motioned him in. The cabin smelled of stew and firewood. Blankets hung from the rafters to trap heat. The children lay curled together on a mattress in the corner, all of them asleep, their hair like wheat under moonlight. She poured him coffee, real hot this time, and sat down across from him. Her hands trembled, but her voice did not. "They said you were a ranger once," she said. "Before the war. Before you lost whoever it was you lost." He blinked. "I asked around," she added softer. "Took me a while. You leave a quiet trail, mister." He drank. The heat burned his throat, pulled tears to his eyes. "You came all this way," she said. "Why?" He didn't speak right away. The fire popped. The boy in the corner murmured in his sleep. "Because I had nowhere else to be," he said at last. "And because of the note." Her face softened, a line between her brows barely visible before smoothed itself away. "I wrote that, hoping it was true," she said. "That people like you still exist." "They don't," he said. "Not many. Not in ways that last." She stood, then crossed the room and opened a small chest by the wall. From it, she drew out something wrapped in muslin. When she handed it to him, he felt the weight before he saw what it was. A revolver. Cleaned, oiled, carefully kept. The initials etched in the handle were his. "Where did you—" "You left it once. Gave it to a man outside Cottonwood to settle his debts. He was my brother. He didn't make it." He held the gun like a prayer. Like a past he thought buried deep enough not to rise. "He said you saved him from being hanged," she whispered. "Bought him time he didn't know how to use." He looked at her, really looked. "And now," he asked. She smiled, slow and tired and real. "Now I hope I know how to use mine." If this tale lingered, subscribe and let it grow. The days turned cold and clear. Snow crusted thick along the eaves of the cabin, and smoke from the chimney spiraled slow into the white sky. Inside, the fire burned constant. He helped chop wood. hauled water from the creek that froze at night, and whispered beneath the ice by morning. The children took to him in quiet ways, sliding their tin cups toward him, at mealtimes tugging his coat when their boots needed lacing. No words at first, just trust offered like crumbs in a careful hand. He learned their names one by one. Emma, the eldest, thin-shouldered but sharp-eyed. She watched her mother closely, copied her movements, wrapped the twins in her own blanket without asking. Joseph, the boy, didn't speak above a whisper. He trailed him, sometimes mimicking the way he saddled the mare or checked the rifle's chamber. Once, when the fire went out and the cabin dipped into silence, Joseph pressed his small hand into his palm and left it there, just long enough to be known. And the baby Clara had a cough that kept them all awake. But she laughed, too, loud and sudden, like she'd remembered joy mid-breath. The woman, her name was Ruth, never explained where the children's father had gone. She didn't speak of the journey that brought her to Larkspur, or how long they'd been running, or what from. He didn't ask. Some truths wore their shape in a person's eyes, and hers carried too many to count. Instead, they worked. The porch needed fixing. The trap line along the ridge had to be reset. He taught her to check for fresh sign, to follow prints through powder without getting turned around. She was quick to learn, quick to bruise her hands, and slow to complain. "I never thought I'd live in a place like this," she said once, wiping her brow with a sleeve stiff from frost. "I always pictured the ocean, water that went on forever." "This goes on forever too," he said, nodding toward the hills. "Yes," she said, "but this one bites." He liked her laugh. Not because it was sweet, it wasn't, but because it surprised even her. Like something forgotten resurfacing without warning. At night, when the children slept and the fire dimmed, she sat across from him with her feet tucked under a quilt and her fingers wrapped around a tin cup. "I had dreams," once she said quietly. "Before the war. Before the sickness. Before all of it." He didn't answer. Just waited. "I was going to be a teacher. Open a school in St. Louis. I had letters of recommendation and a borrowed suitcase. Then I met a man who made promises, and I believed them." She looked up, her face half shadowed in firelight. "Did you ever want anything that didn't want you back?" He nodded. "A piece of land. A wife. Peace. Not always in that order." She smiled again, but this time the sadness didn't rise so fast behind it. They began to talk more after that. Slowly. Like people thawing after a long freeze. He told her about his brother who never came home from Andersonville. About the woman he once asked to marry him and how she wrote him from Kansas with another man's name on the envelope. He told her the truth, that for a long time he stayed alive, not because he wanted to, but because dying took effort. She didn't flinch. "You still think that way?" she asked. "No," he said. "Not since the diner." She looked at the fire, then blinking hard. He reached for her hand, not quick, not rough. Just a brush of fingers offered like warmth. She took it. Outside, the wind howled across the ridge, but inside the silence felt different now. Like rest. Like shelter. Spring came in pieces. Not all at once, but in half-melted days and thawing nights. The ice retreated from the creek like a beaten dog, and the wind turned soft around the edges. Shoots of green pierced the brown earth in places they hadn't dared before. The cabin held its heat longer. The children played outside with coats unbuttoned and voices rising like birdsong. He had begun to build a lean-to for tools beside the house. Ruth came to him with a hammer and a quiet offer to help. She measured boards with care-wiped sawdust from her palms and asked if he planned on staying through summer. "I don't have plans," he said. "You've got roots now," she said, eyeing the porch where Clara sat chewing on a doll made from rags. whether you meant to or not. He didn't answer, just handed her another nail. Later, when the sun dipped behind the trees and the kids had come in with cheeks pink from wind, Ruth pulled a bundle from beneath her bed and laid it across the table. Inside it was a dress not fine but whole, sky blue, faded at the hem but clean. She'd stitched the neckline herself thread by thread over long nights by the fire. I thought I'd wear it if I ever made it to church again, she said, half smiling. Now I don't know why I saved it. But maybe it's time. He didn't know what to say, so he just looked at her, really looked. At the lines near her mouth that deepened when she worried. At the way her hands hovered over the fabric, like she was afraid it might vanish if she touched it too long. That night, he found himself outside long after the others had gone to sleep, staring up at the stars. They pulsed against the dark like embers caught in wind. He felt something in his chest he hadn't felt in years, not longing, not regret. Something quieter. A kind of stillness. A kind of home. But peace doesn't come unchallenged. It was 3 days later when the rider showed up. The children spotted him first, just a blur at the tree line, then a figure on horseback with a coat too fine and a face too sharp. He carried a rifle slung lazy across his back, but the set of his mouth said he knew how to use it. Ruth stiffened the moment she saw him. She stepped outside before the man dismounted. "What do you want, Marshal?" she asked, arms crossed. The man took off his hat, but not kindly. "I came for what's owed. You've got no claim." He looked past her at the cabin, at the children peering through the window, at the man who'd stepped onto the porch, rifle in hand, but barrel down. "You running a little settlement now?" the marshal asked, voice dripping with disdain. "She's not running anything," the man said. "She's surviving. There's a law against that." "There's a warrant," the marshal replied. "Not for her, but for someone she traveled with. Man named Curtis Lane. Thief. And worse. He's dead now, but his debts aren't. Folks back in Sundown say she's holding property that ain't hers. Money, too." "That true?" he asked Ruth. Her jaw tightened. Curtis was a liar, but he wasn't wrong when he said folks are quicker to believe a woman guilty than admit they were fooled by a man. The marshal shrugged. "I don't care who's guilty. I just want what's mine." "You won't find it here," the man said, stepping down off the porch. The marshal smiled slow and mean. "We'll see about that." He turned his horse and rode back toward the ridge, but the threat lingered behind like smoke. Inside, Ruth shook as she packed the children's things into a sack. "He won't quit," she whispered, "even if he knows there's nothing here. He wants to ruin something just to prove he can." He took her hands. "Then we don't give him the chance." "And how do we stop him?" "We stand." She stared at him, terrified, unsure, but not alone. Outside, wind stirred the grass. The sky darkened with coming rain. But in the doorway they stood together, unmoving. This time they would not run. The marshal returned at first light 2 days later. He brought 2 men with him. Hired guns, likely. The kind who didn't care who they pointed their rifles at so long as they got paid. Their horses were lean and restless, and the cold morning air smoked from their mouths like breath from wolves. The man was already outside, sharpening a blade by the woodpile. He'd barely slept, every sense tuned to hoofbeats, to movement in the trees, to the tension in Ruth's voice the night before, as she told him quietly how she buried the money. "I didn't keep it," she said. "Not for me. I didn't want what he left. But it wasn't mine to give back either. So I buried it beneath the sycamore. Let the ground take it." Now, with the sun rising cold and flat, the man stood tall, rifle in hand. "Calm." Morning, the marshal called, drawing his horse to a stop. "Thought I'd give you one more chance to do the smart thing." "We've done nothing wrong," the man said. "That's for the court to decide," the marshal replied, tapping a gloved finger against his saddle horn. Now, I don't need trouble, mister, but I don't need to walk away either. Inside, Ruth had the children gathered behind the hearth. She held Clara close, her free hand wrapped around the stock of a shotgun that barely cleared the top of the table. Emma stood beside her, fists clenched, eyes sharp with fear she wouldn't name. Outside it was still. A hawk circled overhead, slow and soundless. "She's not going anywhere," the man said. "And neither am I." One of the marshal's men shifted in his saddle, eyeing the cabin like it might be more trouble than he'd been told. The other pulled his coat back, revealing a pistol strapped low on his hip. "You really want to make this hard," the marshal said. The man didn't flinch. "I want you to ride on. That's all." The marshal snorted. "That's not the law." "Then maybe the law's forgotten what it's meant to protect." The silence between them thickened. The wind paused. Even the horses stilled. Then, from the trees, another sound rose, a second rider, slow and careful, emerging from the ridge path with dust on his coat and a badge glinting beneath his scarf. Sheriff Tomlin from Larkspur. Older than both men, face like dried leather, and eyes like a canyon that had seen too many dead ends. "I got your telegram," he called to the marshal, reining in beside him. "And I came to see for myself." "This doesn't concern you, Sheriff," the marshal growled. "It does now," Tomlin replied, "because I know this man, and I know the woman inside, and I know what sundown justice looks like when it smells blood." The hired guns looked uneasy. Tomlin turned to the man. "That money buried?" "Yes, sir." "Used?" "No." "Then it ain't evidence. And it sure as hell ain't property anymore." The marshal's jaw flexed. "You gonna file an obstruction charge?" "No," Tomlin said. "I'm gonna tell you to get off this land. Now." It was quiet then, long and sharp. The hired men exchanged a glance. One of them turned his horse. The other followed. The marshal stared hard at the cabin, then at Ruth, now standing in the doorway with the shotgun lowered but not dropped. "You think this is over?" he said. "I think it's enough for today," Tomlin said flatly. The marshal spat into the dust and turned his horse. He didn't look back. When they were gone, Tomlin dismounted and tipped his hat toward Ruth. "You've got more courage than most," he said, "and more sense than all three of them." She nodded, lips pressed tight. Tomlin looked at the man, then the children. "You plan on staying?" The man didn't speak right away. Just reached down, picked up a board he'd meant to nail before the interruption. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think I do." Tomlin tipped his hat again and rode off, leaving them in the hush that followed justice barely served. Inside, Ruth sat the children down. The man knelt beside Clara, pulled a small wooden horse from his coat, whittled in secret, smooth and warm. Her eyes lit up as she took it. Ruth watched him, eyes soft. They didn't need to speak. Outside, the sycamore bent eastward in the wind, same as always. But now it bent towards something solid. Summer softened the land like a slow apology. Wildflowers pushed up through the hard earth in bursts of yellow and violet. The creek ran clear now, no longer hidden beneath ice. The cabin windows stood open during the day, and the children ran barefoot through the grass, their laughter carrying farther than the sound of any axe or hammer. The lean-to was finished. A chicken coop now stood beside it, and a small garden had begun to take root behind the cabin: turnips, beans, potatoes, all planted with the kind of hope that grows quiet but sure. Ruth spent mornings bent over the rows, fingers deep in dirt, shoulders browned by the sun. He worked beside her most days, fixing the fence, teaching Joseph to fish, showing Emma how to carve walking sticks from willow saplings. In the evenings after supper, they sat on the porch in the half-light. Sometimes they talked. Sometimes they didn't. The silence was different now, full, not empty. One evening, as the sky faded orange and the twins lay curled on a quilt nearby, Ruth turned to him with something in her hands. A small box, smoothed with age. "I've been carrying this since Missouri," she said. "I kept it hidden. I didn't know what I was waiting for, but I think I do now." He opened it slowly. Inside, a ring. Simple. Silver. Engraved on the inside, "Let it be chosen." He stared down at it, breath caught. "I thought maybe," she said softly, "we could stop surviving and start deciding." He didn't speak. Just took the ring, closed the box, and held her hand in both of his like it might disappear if he didn't. A week later, under the same sycamore where her note had once been born, they said their vows. No preacher. No crowd. Just the children, the wind, and the land that had tried to break them both but failed. Emma held Clara in her arms and wept, without quite knowing why. Tomlin came the next day, bringing a carved sign to hang above the door, "Lawson Homestead." He stayed long enough for coffee, then rode off without asking questions. That fall, they harvested enough potatoes to trade in Dawson. The co-op held eggs, the shelves held jam, and the nights held warmth that had nothing to do with the fire. The man taught Joseph to ride. Ruth started writing letters again, to her sister, to her old teacher, to herself. She kept them in a box beside her bed, tied with twine. By winter, she was sewing baby clothes again. Not for Clara this time. He touched her stomach one night, his hand trembling. "Are you afraid?" she asked. "Yes," he said, "but I want to be." She smiled and kissed him slow and sure. "So do I." Outside, snow fell like feathers. Inside, the fire crackled and all four children slept as one. The walls were still thin. The wind still found the cracks. But the house was full. At last. These stories do not fade, they move on. Subscribe and follow.